The stagecoach lurched violently as it hit another rut in the well-worn trail, sending Beatrice Reynolds tumbling against the wooden side panel with a painful thud. The year was 1876, and the journey from St. Louis to Silvercreek, Colorado Territory, had been nothing short of miserable. 6 days of endless dust, unbearable heat, and the constant scrutiny of her fellow passengers had worn her spirit thin as paper. "Watch yourself there," muttered the banker seated across from her, barely glancing up from his newspaper. His wife, a thin woman with pinched features, inched away as if Beatrice's size might somehow be contagious. Beatrice straightened her travel dress, a practical navy blue garment that had seen better days. At 22, she was well aware of how the world viewed her fuller figure. Back in St. Louis, after her parents' passing from influenza, the whispers and sideways glances had become unbearable. When her aunt's letter arrived offering her a position as a schoolteacher in Silvercreek, Beatrice had packed her meager belongings and purchased a ticket west, believing that a fresh start might finally allow her to escape the judgment that had shadowed her all her life. The stagecoach driver called out as they approached the next stop. "Coming up on Fairview Station. 30-minute rest before we push on to Silvercreek." The small way station appeared on the horizon, a welcome sight after hours of endless prairie. As the coach rolled to a stop, the other passengers hurried out, eager to stretch their legs. Beatrice waited until last, gathering her reticule and adjusting her bonnet before attempting to navigate the narrow steps down. "Need some help there, miss?" The driver offered his hand, but his eyes held the same mocking glint she'd grown accustomed to seeing. "I can manage, thank you," she replied with as much dignity as she could muster. The first step went well enough, but as she shifted her weight to the second, the rickety wooden step cracked beneath her. Beatrice tumbled forward with a startled cry, landing in an undignified heap in the dusty yard as her carpetbag spilled open, scattering her personal belongings across the dirt. Laughter erupted from the small crowd gathered near the station. The banker's wife covered her mouth in feigned horror while clearly delighting in Beatrice's humiliation. "Seems the wagon couldn't bear the load," called out a rough-looking cowhand, sending another wave of cruel laughter through the onlookers. Tears of humiliation burned Beatrice's eyes as she scrambled to collect her scattered possessions. A pair of gloves, her mother's silver hairbrush, a well-worn copy of Pride and Prejudice, all now coated in frontier dust. Her cheeks burned with shame as she reached for a handkerchief that had landed just beyond her grasp. "Here," said a gentle voice. "Let me help you." Beatrice looked up to find a young woman kneeling beside her, already gathering the spilled items and placing them carefully back in the carpet bag. She appeared to be about Beatrice's age, with honey blonde hair peeking out from beneath a practical hat, and kind eyes that held no judgment. "Pay them no mind," the young woman said quietly. "Folks out here should know better than to forget their manners." She extended her hand. "I'm Charlotte Collins, but everyone calls me Charlie." Beatrice hesitated before accepting the offered hand. "Beatrice Reynolds, thank you for your kindness." Charlie helped her to her feet with surprising strength for her slender frame. "You heading to Silvercreek on this coach?" "Yes," Beatrice nodded, brushing dust from her skirts. "I'm to be the new schoolteacher there." "Well, isn't that something?" Charlie's face lit up. "That's where I'm from. My pa's ranch is just outside town. I've been visiting my aunt in Denver these past 2 weeks." She glanced back at the stagecoach with a frown. "That step's been loose for months. Johnson there should have fixed it ages ago." The driver, overhearing, merely shrugged and continued loading mail bags. "Come on," Charlie said, picking up Beatrice's carpet bag. "Let's get you something cool to drink before the journey continues." It's another 4 hours to Silvercreek, and this June heat is merciless. Inside the way station, Charlie led Beatrice to a quiet corner table away from the other passengers. A gruff-looking man behind the counter nodded at Charlie with familiarity. "2 lemonades, Mr. Peterson, if you please," Charlie called, "and put it on my father's account." "Your father has an account at a way station?" Beatrice asked, surprised. Charlie smiled. "My father, Henry Collins, runs the largest cattle operation in the county, the Double C Ranch. His business keeps half these establishments afloat." There was pride in her voice, but no arrogance. "He's a good man. Taught me that folks should be judged by their character, not by how they look or where they come from." The lemonades arrived, blessedly cold against the heat of the day. As they sipped their drinks, Charlie told Beatrice about Silvercreek, the small but growing town, the newly built schoolhouse where Beatrice would teach, and the community that, according to Charlie, was mostly good folk, once you get to know them. "The town's been waiting for a proper teacher," Charlie explained. "The last one lasted barely a month before heading back east, said the children were too wild and the conditions too primitive." She studied Beatrice. "You don't strike me as someone who gives up easily, though." "I don't intend to," Beatrice replied with more confidence than she felt. "I've come too far to turn back now." The driver's call for passengers interrupted their conversation. As they rose to leave, Charlie placed a gentle hand on Beatrice's arm. "Listen, those folks on the coach, they don't matter. When we get to Silvercreek, you can stay at our ranch for a few days until the schoolteacher's quarters are ready. Pa won't mind." Before Beatrice could respond, Charlie was already negotiating with the driver. "Johnson, that step needs fixing before we continue, and Miss Reynolds will be riding up front with me for the remainder of the journey." "Now see here, Miss Collins," the driver began, "unless you'd prefer I tell my father about the unsafe conditions on this line." "I'm sure he'd be interested, considering how many cattle contracts you transport." The driver's protest died on his lips. Within minutes, Beatrice found herself settled comfortably on the driver's bench between Charlie and Johnson, her carpetbag securely stowed, and the broken step temporarily reinforced. As the coach pulled away from the station, Beatrice caught the astonished expressions of her former traveling companions through the window. For the first time in days, she felt something other than shame and resignation. She felt seen. The remainder of the journey passed in relative comfort. From the elevated position on the driver's bench, Beatrice could appreciate the stunning landscape, rolling prairies giving way to distant mountains, the afternoon sun casting long shadows across the terrain. Charlie pointed out landmarks and shared stories of growing up on the frontier. "Pa raised me alone after my mother passed when I was 8, Charlie explained. "He could have sent me east to relatives for a proper upbringing, but he couldn't bear to part with me. So I learned to ride and rope alongside the ranch hands, caused quite the scandal in town." She laughed, a bright, clear sound that made Beatrice smile in response. "Your father sounds remarkable," Beatrice said. "He is," Charlie agreed, "though he's not always easy, stubborn as they come and protective to a fault. You'll meet him soon enough." As the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, the coach crested a hill, and Silvercreek came into view in the valley below. It was larger than Beatrice had expected, a proper main street lined with wooden buildings, a church steeple rising above the rooftops, and dozens of houses spreading outward from the town center. "There it is," Charlie said, "your new home." The stagecoach rolled down the main street, attracting curious glances from townspeople going about their evening business. Johnson pulled to a stop in front of the Silvercreek Hotel, where most of the passengers would disembark. "The schoolteacher's quarters won't be ready until next week," Charlie explained as they climbed down. Mrs. Wilson's been airing it out and fixing it up, but there was a leak in the roof that needed tending to. I can stay at the hotel, Beatrice offered, suddenly worried about imposing. Nonsense. Pa's expecting us. I sent a telegraph from the last stop. Charlie was already flagging down a wagon driven by a young ranch hand. Jimmy, perfect timing. This is Miss Reynolds, our new schoolteacher. We'll need a ride back to the ranch. The journey to the Double C Ranch took them out of town and along a well-maintained road that wound through lush pastureland. As they traveled, Beatrice could see hundreds of cattle grazing in the distance and riders moving among the herds. Pa's been building this place for 20 years, Charlie explained with evident pride. Started with just 50 head of cattle and a run-down cabin. Now we've got over 2,000 head and the finest breeding stock in the territory. The ranch house itself was impressive, a large two-story structure built of sturdy logs and stone, with a wide porch wrapping around 3 sides. Several outbuildings, barns, and corrals surrounded it, and a bunkhouse stood a short distance away. As their wagon pulled into the yard, a tall figure emerged from the main house. Henry Collins was not what Beatrice had expected. In her mind, she'd pictured an older version of the typical cowhands she'd seen along the journey, rough-edged and weather-beaten. Instead, Henry was perhaps in his early 40s, with broad shoulders and a dignified bearing that spoke of both physical strength and quiet authority. His dark hair was touched with silver at the temples, and his eyes the same warm brown as his daughter's crinkled at the corners as he spotted Charlie. "There's my girl," he called, striding toward the wagon. "Was beginning to wonder if you'd decided to stay in Denver after all." Charlie jumped down and threw her arms around her father. "Not a chance, Pa. City life isn't for me." She turned back toward the wagon. "I've brought company. This is Miss Beatrice Reynolds, our new schoolteacher. Her quarters in town aren't ready yet, so I invited her to stay with us for a few days." Henry Collins turned his attention to Beatrice, and she felt herself tense involuntarily, bracing for the judgment she'd come to expect. Instead, he removed his hat and offered a genuine smile. "Miss Reynolds, welcome to the Double C. Any friend of Charlie's is welcome here." He extended a hand to help her down from the wagon. "Charlie's been pestering me about the state of education in Silvercreek since she learned to read. I suspect she had a hand in convincing the town council to hire a new teacher." Charlie shrugged, though her cheeks colored slightly. "Someone had to do something. Those children deserve better than arithmetic on slates 3 days a week." Henry laughed. "Come on inside, both of you. Mrs. Gunderson will have supper waiting, and you can tell me all about your travels." The interior of the ranch house was surprisingly refined for a frontier home. The main living area featured comfortable furniture, bookshelves lined with volumes, and colorful woven rugs covering the wooden floors. Photographs and paintings adorned the walls, and a large stone fireplace dominated one end of the room. "This is lovely," Beatrice said, genuinely impressed. "My late wife's influence," Henry explained, a shadow of old grief crossing his features. "Elizabeth believed that just because we live on the frontier doesn't mean we should forsake civilization entirely." Mrs. Gunderson, the housekeeper, was a robust Norwegian woman who welcomed Beatrice warmly and showed her to a comfortable guest room on the 2nd floor. For the first time in days, Beatrice was able to wash away the dust of travel properly and change into a fresh dress before joining the Collins family for supper. Over a hearty meal of roast beef, potatoes, and fresh baked bread, Beatrice found herself relaxing in the easy conversation. Henry asked thoughtful questions about her teaching experience and plans for the school, while Charlie eagerly shared news from Denver and stories from the stagecoach journey, tactfully omitting the humiliation Beatrice had suffered. "The school board will want to meet with you tomorrow or the next day," Henry mentioned as they enjoyed apple pie for dessert. "As it happens, I serve as chairman so I can introduce you around." "That would be most helpful, Mr. Collins," Beatrice replied. "I'm eager to see the schoolhouse and begin preparing for the term. Call me Henry, please. Mr. Collins makes me feel like my father." His smile was warm, reaching his eyes in a way that made Beatrice feel genuinely welcome. After dinner, they retired to the living room where Charlie played the piano surprisingly well for someone who claimed to have had only sporadic lessons from traveling musicians. Beatrice found herself singing along to some of the familiar tunes, her clear soprano voice blending nicely with Charlie's alto. As the evening drew to a close, Beatrice realized she hadn't thought about her size or worried about judgment for hours. For the first time since leaving St. Louis, she felt a spark of hope that Silvercreek might truly offer the fresh start she'd been seeking. The next morning, after a breakfast that would have fed 3 people back in St. Louis, Charlie offered to show Beatrice around the ranch. They walked through the extensive gardens where Mrs. Gunderson grew vegetables and herbs, past the chicken coops and the smokehouse, and toward the corrals where several horses watched them with interest. "You ride, Beatrice?" Charlie asked. "I've never had the opportunity," Beatrice admitted. "In the city, I walked most places or took omnibuses." Charlie's eyes lit up. "Then we must teach you. Every person in these parts needs to know how to ride. The school is nearly 2 miles from town, and in winter, you'll need a reliable way to get there." Before Beatrice could protest, Charlie was leading her toward a gentle-looking chestnut mare. "This is Penny. She's sweet-tempered and patient, perfect for a beginner." What followed was an impromptu riding lesson that left Beatrice alternately terrified and exhilarated. Charlie was a patient teacher, and by the end of an hour, Beatrice was cautiously guiding Penny around the corral at a walk. "You're a natural," Charlie declared, though Beatrice suspected this was generous encouragement rather than fact. From the corner of her eye, Beatrice noticed Henry watching from the fence, his expression unreadable. When their eyes met, he tipped his hat and smiled before turning back to his conversation with the ranch foreman. Later that afternoon, Henry drove them into town in a well-sprung buggy pulled by 2 matching bay horses. Silvercreek appeared even more substantial in daylight, a proper frontier town with a bustling main street, featuring a general store, hotel, bank, and several saloons, along with various other businesses. "We'll show you the school first," Henry suggested, guiding the horses down a side street. The schoolhouse stood on a slight rise at the edge of town, a solid white painted building with large windows and a small bell tower. Adjacent to it was a modest cottage that would be Beatrice's home. "It's not fancy," Charlie said as they approached the teacher's quarters, "but it's sturdy and private." Inside, Beatrice found a sitting room with a small cast iron stove, a bedroom just large enough for a bed and wardrobe, and a tiny kitchen area. The furnishings were simple but appeared comfortable enough. "Mrs. Wilson from the Ladies' Aid Society has been overseeing the repairs," Henry explained. "The roof leaked during spring rains, but that's all fixed now. They're putting in new floor coverings and curtains, and it should be ready by week's end." "It's perfect," Beatrice said sincerely. After the cramped room she'd rented in St. Louis, this cottage seemed like a palace, a place that would be entirely her own. They continued to the schoolhouse itself, where Beatrice was delighted to find well-made desks, a decent chalkboard, and even a small library of books. The previous teacher had left detailed records of each student's progress, which would be invaluable for planning. We have 28 students enrolled, Henry explained, ranging from 6 to 16 years old. Some of the ranch children only attend during winter months when the work is lighter. Including yours? Beatrice asked Charlie with a smile. Charlie laughed. I finished my schooling 2 years ago, thank goodness. Though Pa made sure I continued with correspondence courses from a ladies' seminary in Denver. Education matters, Henry said simply, especially out here where opportunities can be limited. The remainder of the day was spent meeting members of the school board and various townsfolk. Beatrice was introduced as our new teacher from St. Louis, with such pride by both Henry and Charlie that people seemed to look past her size and see her qualifications instead. The only sour note came when they encountered the banker's wife from the stagecoach, who clearly hadn't expected to see Beatrice in the company of the respected Collins family. Miss Reynolds, she acknowledged stiffly, I see you've made yourself comfortable in our little town already. Indeed, Mrs. Hargrove, Henry replied before Beatrice could speak. We're fortunate to have secured a teacher with Miss Reynolds' credentials. I understand your Abigail will be in her class this fall. The woman's pinched expression grew even tighter. Yes, well, we shall see how the term progresses. As they walked away, Charlie squeezed Beatrice's arm. Don't mind her. Mrs. Hargrove thinks because her husband runs the bank, she runs the town. She's been trying to marry Pa off to her widowed sister for years. Henry coughed uncomfortably. Charlotte, please. Charlie grinned unrepentantly. It's true, Pa, and you know it. The days that followed fell into a pleasant rhythm. Mornings were spent in town, where Beatrice familiarized herself with the school and met more of her future students and their parents. Afternoons often included riding lessons, with Beatrice gradually gaining confidence on horseback. Evenings were spent in the comfortable living room of the ranch house, reading or playing cards or simply talking. Throughout it all, Beatrice found herself increasingly drawn to Henry Collins. He was unlike any man she'd known before, thoughtful and educated, yet practical and strong. He treated her with a respect that made her forget the years of dismissal she'd endured. When he looked at her, she felt he was truly seeing her, not just her size, but her mind, her heart, her spirit. For his part, Henry seemed to seek out her company. He asked her opinion on books they'd both read, listened attentively to her ideas for the school, and occasionally found reasons to touch her hand or arm in ways that sent unexpected warmth through her. On the fourth evening, after Charlie had retired early with a headache, Henry and Beatrice sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the western sky in brilliant oranges and purples. Charlie thinks very highly of you, Henry remarked, breaking a comfortable silence. And I of her, Beatrice replied honestly. She's remarkable, kind and brave, and so sure of herself. You've raised her wonderfully. Henry smiled, his gaze still on the horizon. It wasn't always easy. There were times I wondered if I was doing her a disservice, keeping her out here instead of sending her east for a proper ladies' education. I think the education she's received here has been far more valuable, Beatrice said. She knows who she is and what she believes. That's rare in anyone, but especially in young women who are so often taught to efface themselves. Henry turned to look at her then, his expression thoughtful. You speak from experience. It wasn't a question, but Beatrice nodded anyway. My parents were kind people, but conventional. They worried constantly about my appearance and how it would affect my prospects. After they died, I discovered how limited those prospects truly were. She paused, surprised at herself for sharing so much. Coming west was my chance to be judged for my abilities rather than my appearance. And are you finding that to be true in Silvercreek? Henry asked softly. Beatrice considered the question. With some people, yes. With others, time will tell, she smiled. but having the Collins family in my corner certainly helps. Henry's hand moved to cover hers on the porch railing. You have us for as long as you need. The touch of his hand sent a flutter through Beatrice's chest. She knew she should pull away. It wasn't proper to be sitting alone with him like this, let alone allowing such familiar contact. But something in his eyes held her in place, and the moment stretched between them, full of unspoken possibilities. The spell was broken by the arrival of a ranch hand with a question about the next day's work rotation. Henry reluctantly withdrew his hand and addressed the business, while Beatrice excused herself to go inside, her heart racing with confusion and unexpected hope. The following day, Mrs. Wilson from the Ladies' Aid Society arrived at the ranch to inform Beatrice that the teacher's cottage was ready for occupancy. "We've stocked the pantry with essentials and made up the bed," the older woman explained. "You can move in whenever you're ready, though school won't start for another 3 weeks." Despite the Collins family's protests that she was welcome to stay longer, Beatrice knew it was time to establish herself in town. Her growing feelings for Henry were confusing enough without the daily proximity, and she needed to focus on preparing for the school term. "At least stay through the weekend," Charlie pleaded. "The Founders' Day celebration is Saturday, and the whole town will be there. It would be the perfect opportunity for you to meet everyone." Unable to resist Charlie's enthusiasm, Beatrice agreed to remain until Sunday. Henry arranged for her belongings to be moved to the cottage in the meantime, so everything would be ready for her arrival. The Founders' Day celebration was held in the town square, with bunting decorating the buildings and tables laden with food contributed by every family. There was music, dancing, games for the children, and a general atmosphere of festivity that reminded Beatrice of 4th of July celebrations back east, though on a smaller scale. Charlie introduced Beatrice to so many people that names and faces began to blur together. Everyone seemed curious about the new teacher, and while some eyed her figure with barely disguised judgment, most were welcoming. "Miss Reynolds," called a familiar voice as Beatrice was sampling Mrs. Peterson's apple pie. She turned to find the banker's wife approaching with a tall, balding man in tow. "Mrs. Hargrove," Beatrice acknowledged with a polite nod. "I wanted to introduce my brother-in-law, Mr. Thaddeus Green. He's recently widowed and has moved to Silvercreek to open a law practice." The woman's smile was predatory. "Mr. Green will be serving on the school board as well, so you'll be working closely together." The man barely glanced at Beatrice before his gaze drifted over her shoulder, clearly seeking more interesting company. "Charmed, I'm sure," he muttered. Before Beatrice could respond, a warm hand settled at the small of her back, and Henry appeared beside her. "Thaddeus, good to see you again. I see you've met our new teacher." The lawyer straightened immediately. "Collins, yes, just making her acquaintance." "Miss Reynolds comes highly recommended from St. Louis," Henry continued, his hand remaining supportively at Beatrice's back. "We're fortunate to have secured someone with her qualifications." Mrs. Hargrove's eyes narrowed at Henry's clear approval. "Yes. Well, Mr. Green was just saying he'd be happy to escort Miss Reynolds to the dancing later this evening." "I fear Mr. Green is too late," Henry replied smoothly. "Miss Reynolds has already promised her first dance to me." Beatrice hadn't done any such thing, but she wasn't about to contradict him. "Indeed," she agreed, suppressing a smile at Mrs. Hargrove's obvious disappointment. As the banker's wife led her brother-in-law away, Beatrice turned to Henry. "Thank you for the rescue, though I'm not sure I've actually danced in years." "Then it's high time you did," he replied, his eyes warm. "The offer stands if you're willing." As evening fell, lanterns were lit around the square and the musicians assembled on a small platform. Couples began to gather for the dancing, and true to his word, Henry appeared at Beatrice's side, offering his arm. "Shall we?" he asked. Beatrice hesitated only briefly before placing her hand on his arm. "I should warn you that I may step on your toes." Henry led her to the dancing area. "I survived teaching Charlie to dance. I suspect my toes will endure." The music began a lively waltz that had couples turning across the packed earth of the town square. Henry's hand at her waist was steady and sure as he guided her through the steps. After a few tentative turns, Beatrice found the rhythm, and soon they were moving together with unexpected grace. "You dance beautifully," Henry said, his voice low enough that only she could hear. "I had lessons as a girl," Beatrice admitted. "But it's been many years since anyone asked me to dance." "Their loss," Henry replied simply. As they moved across the square, Beatrice was aware of curious glances from the townspeople. The respected rancher and school board chairman dancing with the new, overweight schoolteacher was clearly a source of interest. But with Henry's strong hand at her waist and his eyes never leaving hers, Beatrice found she didn't care what anyone thought. One dance became two, then three. When they finally paused for refreshment, Charlie appeared beside them, her face flushed from dancing with Jimmy, the young ranch hand. "You two look like you're enjoying yourselves," she remarked with a knowing smile. "Your father is an excellent partner," Beatrice replied, accepting a cup of lemonade from Henry. "He should be," Charlie said. "Mother made him practice for hours before every social event. She said a man who could dance well would never want for conversation partners." Henry's expression softened at the mention of his late wife. Elizabeth was a wise woman in many ways. A moment of melancholy passed between father and daughter, a shared remembrance of the woman they'd both loved and lost. Then Charlie brightened. "She would have liked you, Beatrice." She had no patience for pretense either. The evening continued with more dancing, conversation, and laughter. As the celebration wound down, Henry offered to drive Beatrice back to the ranch. "It's been a wonderful day," Beatrice said as they rode through the darkness, the stars brilliant overhead. "It has," Henry agreed. After a moment's hesitation, he added, "I've enjoyed these days with you at the ranch, Beatrice, more than I can properly express." Beatrice's heart quickened. "As have I find myself, reluctant to see you leave tomorrow." The admission hung in the air between them, fraught with possibility. Beatrice gathered her courage. "Henry, I know it's too soon," he interrupted gently. "We've known each other barely a week. But I haven't felt this way in a very long time, not since Elizabeth was alive. And I find myself wondering if perhaps you might feel something similar." Beatrice looked at his strong profile in the moonlight, scarcely believing this conversation was real. "I do," she whispered. "But I can't help wondering if you've considered what people will say. A man like you, showing interest in someone like me." Henry pulled the buggy to a stop and turned to face her fully. "Someone like you? You mean an intelligent, compassionate, beautiful woman who has shown more courage in coming west alone than most men I know possess." "That's very kind, but you know what I mean," Beatrice persisted. "I'm not the sort of woman men like you typically notice." "Then most men are fools," Henry said firmly. "Beatrice, I've spent 20 years building this ranch, raising my daughter, and doing what needed to be done. I never expected to find someone who makes me feel alive again, who makes me want to recite poetry and dance under the stars." He took her hands in his. "I don't give a damn what anyone in town thinks. The question is, could you see yourself considering a future here, not just as Silvercreek's teacher, but perhaps someday as something more to me?" Tears welled in Beatrice's eyes. "I came west looking for a place where I could be valued for my mind rather than judged for my appearance. I never dared hope I might find someone who would truly see me and care for what he saw. Henry's hand gently cupped her cheek. I see you, Beatrice Reynolds. And everything I see, I admire. Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, he leaned forward. His lips met hers in a kiss that started gently but deepened as Beatrice responded, her heart soaring with a joy she'd never thought to experience. When they finally broke apart, both a little breathless, Henry smiled. I suppose this means you'll be staying in Silvercreek for the foreseeable future. I believe I will, Beatrice replied, returning his smile. I have 28 students to teach after all. And it seems I have a great deal to learn myself about ranching and riding and perhaps even about love. We'll learn together, Henry promised, gathering her into his arms once more. The next morning, Beatrice still moved to the teacher's cottage as planned. Both she and Henry agreed that propriety demanded some distance as their relationship developed. Charlie, delighted by the turn of events, divided her time between helping Beatrice settle into her new home and keeping gossip at bay in town with strategic comments about her father's long overdue interest in intellectual conversation. As the weeks passed and summer gave way to fall, Beatrice found her place in Silvercreek. The school term began successfully, with even Mrs. Hargrove reluctantly admitting that her Abigail was showing marked improvement in her arithmetic. The initial curiosity about Beatrice's size faded as her abilities as a teacher became apparent, and those who continued to judge her found themselves at odds with the influential Collins family and their many allies. Henry courted her properly, with chaperoned outings, Sunday dinners, and regular visits to the school. By Christmas, when he proposed marriage with a simple gold band and a heart full of love, no one in town was surprised, least of all Charlie, who had already taken to calling Beatrice Ma when they were alone. They were married the following spring in the Silvercreek church, with Charlie serving as maid of honor and the entire town in attendance. As Beatrice walked down the aisle in a dress of ivory silk that Mrs. Gunderson had helped her make, she caught sight of the banker's wife and her thin-lipped disapproval. For a moment, she was transported back to that dusty way station where she'd been laughed off the wagon, humiliated and alone. Then her eyes met Henry's at the altar, so full of love and admiration, and beside him stood Charlie, beaming with happiness for them both. Beatrice smiled, letting the memory fade away. That day of shame had led her here to this moment of joy, to these people who loved her exactly as she was. Sometimes, Beatrice reflected as she joined her soon-to-be husband at the altar, the most difficult journeys led to the most beautiful destinations, and she wouldn't change a single step of the path that had brought her home.